Today is Sunday, April 2nd, 2017. My name is Sandra Garcia, and I'm interviewing Antonio Martinez for the Voces Oral History Project in Brownsville, Texas, at St. Joseph's Academy. Thank you, Mr. Martinez, for coming and to join us. Just to make sure you understand, the interview will be housed at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection. If there's anything you don't want to talk about, you don't have to. If there is something you want to talk about, please let us know.
Thank you.
Awesome. And directly at me, you don't have to look at the camera.
Okay, I'll look at you.
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome. Just to start off, tell me a little bit about where you grew up, what that was like.
Sure. You're actually in Brownsville in this interview, and we call this the Lower Rio Grande Valley. I was born in Harlingen, Texas, about 30 miles, as we say, up the road. And I grew up in Harlingen. I was born in 1945. That was the era where we still had a lot of different types of, let's say, separation of the Mexican-American population versus the Anglo. So in Harlingen, we all lived on the west side of town. We had our own Catholic school, we had our own church, we had our own part of the cemetery. It was all kind of an interesting dynamic, and there were certain areas that you could go to and certain areas that you couldn't go to. As time went on, we were actually the first Mexican-American family to move across the railroad tracks back in the 50s. And then I ended up going to St. Anthony Catholic School, which was predominantly Anglo, and graduated from there. But I spent the first 12 or 13 years of my life in Harlingen. My dad was a wholesale grocer. I actually got my Social Security card at the age of 5. My dad was very big on working. Working and education were kind of like the two things that we really emphasized in our family. Consequently, after I finished 8th grade at St. Anthony, I went to Peacock Military Academy in San Antonio for my high school education. And I think I graduated when I was about 17 years old. And then started my college career and eventually became a lawyer. But growing up in Harlingen, or in the Lower Rio Grande Valley, was very, very interesting in those days. They had a lot of different perspectives, I would say, in looking at how you were growing up. And although when you're that age, you don't really recognize some of the separation of the communities as they were, in looking back, you see how a lot of those things, there was a lot of distinctions that were being made. And probably one of the reasons that I didn't go to high school there, and I couldn't tell you that for sure, but there were 6 of us, there were 6 siblings, and the first 3 actually, where we're sitting today, this campus wasn't here when my brother came to St. Joseph's, but it was an all-boys school, and my 2 oldest sisters went to Incarnate Word because that was the girls' school. They came to Brownsville. And then my other 2 sisters eventually went to San Antonio, just like I did, to high school and thereafter.
Wow, okay, great. You mentioned earlier your family was the first to move across these separation lines.
Yeah, the railroad track, I think you're going to find that a lot of the cities in South Texas, perhaps maybe throughout Texas, that there was always the west side and the east side, and the railroad tracks basically, kind of was the dividing line. Much like when I went to University of Texas, the Interstate Highway 35, inside the Highway 35 was the inner city, and again on the outside of 35 on 6th Street, 5th Street, 4th Street, all the way down to 1st Street was where all the African American and Mexican American families were. So history tells us a whole lot, and it's a whole lot to learn from, but there was definitely a difference in the communities that one lived in, and it wasn't quite as mixed up as it is today, which is good.
How did your parents explain that to you? Did they ever?
You know, it's really kind of interesting in looking back is that I don't think we ever thought about it, to be honest with you. I think it was just a way of life. And in my family, my dad, was a very hard worker, didn't really go out much, spent a lot of family time. We just worked hard, studied hard, and just did our thing. And so I can't really tell you that we had many conversations about what to do. It was like, when I think television had come about sometime in the 40s, we didn't get one until I was about 10 or 11 years old. And quite frankly, if my dad would catch you watching television, he'd say, "Hey, how come you don't have any work to do? Or you don't have any studying to do?" It was pretty much understood that we had a mission in life, and that was to either study or go to work.
Right. Okay. So you were born in Harlingen, raised in Harlingen, but went to school in San Antonio. Why is that?
I went to high school in San Antonio, and then I ended up graduating from the University of Texas at Austin, where you're at, in '67. Then went back to law school in St. Mary's University and graduated from law school in 1970.
Was that because you noticed any disparities in education between the Lower Rio Grande Valley and Central Texas?
Well, there was no law school. There's still no law school, quite frankly, down here. And I wish I could tell you that it was a lifelong dream of me being a lawyer, but quite frankly, it wasn't. It was one of those times when the Vietnam War was going on. We all had sort of mixed feelings about that, and again, being a university student during that period of time, down here, it was mandatory draft. So you had to go into the service. It wasn't like you wanted to or didn't want to. And our draft board was in San Benito. And quite frankly, again, if the truth be known and the story be told, a lot of the Mexican-American families had Mexican-American surnames. We came out because it was like a lottery. It was a draw. See whether you were in, how far down the line were you to be called up? And it seemed like all the Mexican-American guys, we were first in line. Like I think I was number 12 or 10 or something like that. And unfortunately, in 1966, I was a junior in college, I believe, and my brother was involved in a plane accident and got killed. And consequently, I became a sole surviving son, so I was exempt from going into the service. A little bit like Saving, Private Ryan, the movie, because the idea there was to try to keep the family name going, and I was the only other male in our family, so I was exempted from going into the service.
Right, okay. And earlier you said you went to the University of Texas. What was that like?
Well, it was really kind of interesting in looking back again, is that the University of Texas, for the most part, we all hung around the same people that we hung around down here in the valley. There was the Valley group, as they would call them. There was the Laredo group, and we never did veer too differently from, I don't know what it's like now, but again, that was a time and period where I forgot there was 20,000 students or whatever it was. It was a relatively small group compared to what you guys have now.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what were your interactions like with Anglo-American students?
Well, if they were from the Valley, we hung around together, okay? And if there was another Mexican-American group, then we would hang around with them. But it was pretty much, again, not isolated, but also not integrated. I mean, you weren't in the mainstream. I mean, you weren't what were the cheerleaders, whatever they were called, or you weren't in the fraternities. You weren't in that just didn't happen back then. And like I said, it was an interesting time. Not having been brought up thinking too much about it, I probably didn't put a whole lot of stock into it. We just kind of, again, we were there to get an education. We were there to, um, we didn't have student loans. We just scraped by, in other words. And since my dad was in the wholesale grocery business, every time you had a chance to come home, you'd come home and stack up on your, the canned goods that you had, and that's what you ate for the whole semester.
Right. Wow. Okay. So you said you went to St. Mary's Law School. Did that desire to become an attorney begin at the University of Texas?
No, what happens was because at the time in 1966, before my brother passed away, the one thing that you did have was a student deferment. Okay. And so I had really no desire to go to Vietnam. I already had one of my brother-in-law's nephews had already been killed, and he was the first one. As a matter of fact, in Harlingen, Texas, there's a park named after him, George Gutierrez, and he had gone to A&M. We were all about the same age, and so quite frankly, even from far away, it didn't look like a real, great way to spend your youth. You got to understand there was a whole lot of different opinions about whether we should be there or not. In any event, what the deal was, and we didn't know how long it was going to last, but when my brother passed away in a plane crash, I think it was March the 19th, it was St. Joseph's Day in 1966, and I had another brother-in-law who was over there, and he was missing in action. So, when I got my deferment, by that time I'd already applied to law school and had been accepted. So, quite frankly, not knowing what the future was going to hold, I decided, well, instead of wasting any time, like my father would tell me, further your education, and then let's see where that takes you. So that's why, like I said, I wish I could tell you in the ideal world that it was something that I was looking forward to. I had no earthly idea, and then they told me the same thing they told my boys when they went to law school. You can't work. And I told my dad, and he said, well, then you can't eat. If you don't work, you don't eat. So I went to law school, and then and I was actually worked as a teller at a bank, and then eventually with legal aid. I worked all my time during law school. We didn't have those kind of resources back then.
Right. Okay. So what was life like at St. Mary's?
It was great. It really was. The only thing is that, as soon as I got out of school in the morning, I would go work at the Broadway National Bank. That was the first time they had outside tellers, so I became a teller. And like I said, and everywhere we went, my dad, you look back and you say, the mom and the pops that you have, I look back and I'm very grateful, because what happens was no matter where we went, we knew how to work, we didn't complain, and we did our job well, and we had to succeed. So, I think when I graduated from grade school, I was like second in my class. When I graduated from high school, I was salutatorian. So it was one of those things that you just had to, you weren't allowed in this family to be one of those kind of guys that going like, well, I don't work on Sundays, or I don't work late, I don't do this. You did what you had to do, and you get it done, and that was it.
Absolutely. So it seems like your father had a major role in your education. Can you tell me a little bit more about him?
Well, in looking back again, he did. He was educated in Mexico, and so he had the equivalent of a college degree. My mother didn't, but my mother was actually the driving force in making sure that we got a good education, mainly because I think she didn't, although she was probably the most commonsensical one of us. I had 4 sisters, and back then, the girls really didn't go to college. They finished high school to get married or do whatever. My mother insisted that everybody go to college, and so we all graduated from college, with the exception of my older brother. I think he went into the military, and he was in the military when he went into a plane crash. No, it was working was from my dad, education was from my mom. So, but nice combination.
Right. Did they influence you to go into what you did?
No, I think it was just the general theme is, you work hard, um, and you get educated. And I will tell you, when I was in grade school, there was the Sisters of Divine Providence that were at St. Anthony's back then. And I was a pretty hyper kind of guy. So this little, one of the nuns that was teaching there, she goes like, you ought to direct that and channel that to learn more. And I'd say, why do I want to learn more? And she would say, because the more you learn, the more fun you have in life. And that line stuck with me forever. I mean, I'm a very curious person. I love to learn, and I love to read. But that comes from all those little influences that one has, and that's why it's truly important, as your formation goes, that not only are you there for your children, but you might want to say a few things that kind of help them get through there, and learn how to do the things that you really would like to do.
Right, absolutely. Wow. Okay, so let's talk about your law firm, because you do have one here in Brownsville, correct?
Okay. Yeah, no, what happens is, I'll tell you again. I started out in Harlingen. My oldest child had been born at same time that I graduated from law school and took the bar exam. I, quite frankly, didn't know exactly what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. There is transactional lawyers, which means that you sit in the office and you do a lot of paperwork, do real estate, do contracts, do deeds, do all sorts of things. Or you can be a trial lawyer, and that means you have to go in the courtroom and do your thing. And so I asked a professor whose name is Aloysius Leopold. For whatever reason, I remember these things because they're little nuggets of wisdom that I think that carries on through my life, and I try to do this to younger people that I cross the paths with, because he just said, you know what, you can always be a trial lawyer and try it out, and if you don't like it, you can go back and do a transactional lawyer, but you can't go the other way around, because you won't sit in the office and then try to learn how to be a trial lawyer. You have to start out as a trial lawyer. And the second piece of advice, he said, where do I said, well, so where should I go? We had opportunities to be a lawyer in Houston, San Antonio, different places. And he looked at me and he says, where do you want to live? And I said, well, I got to go back and take care of my parents back in Harlingen. And he says, well, go practice where you're going to live. So those are the two things that I did. And I tried my hand at trial lawyer, trying lawsuits, and I fell in love with it. I really, truly, but at that point I was doing defense work, which means I was working for insurance companies. And, that was fun, but it wasn't my thing. So I stayed there for a couple of years, and then I eventually went over to help people that, what they call the plaintiff side of the bar, the people that get injured. Then I started doing that, and I guess, as they say, the rest is history. But I loved the courtroom. It was one of those things that you were able to express yourself. At least in my book, you were able to do some good. And what I did back then was I tried, criminal law and civil law, and I found very little attractive about doing criminal law. I just didn't, just not my thing. But I loved helping people that were injured, or things that were, again, it goes back to the learning process, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But it was like, you could do products liability, which means you had to deal with engineers, and when someone gets hurt, you had to deal with doctors, so that was medicine. You dealt with a lot of different aspects of, of life, whether it be engineering, whether it be medical expertise, how the body worked, how did you get injured, and what are the long-term effects of your injuries. I did a lot of brain injury cases, and so all those things really kind of gelled for me. I really, am grateful and feel very blessed, because I was able to not get bored, if you would, because I was able to express myself. I was able to get some justice in my book. help people that didn't have any help. So it all fit in pretty nicely.
Right. Wow. Is there any case in particular you remember still?
Oh gosh, I tell you what, I do. I remember a lot of them, but I think the one that probably, one of the things I found out early on is that, the biggest thing that would bother me about who gets injured were especially kids, and so especially if whether it was I did drug-related cases, I did environmental cases, and the one that I remember, and I remember a lot of them because I did a lot of them, but one of them was when there was an epidemic of children being born with neural tube defects, which means they either had spinal bifida or they died. And so we pursued an action that we found out from an environmental standpoint there was a lot of toxics substance in the air. And at that point, we were able to settle the case in the long run before we went to trial. But I think now the science is there. At that point, the science was just starting. But it became apparent that the solvents, and my theory was that if you smell paint, those solvents are the same ones that they were using in some of the processes that went along around here. And it was mainly in Mexico, but the air was coming this way. So we did the modeling from a computer program from the EPA. We did isopleth maps. We did all kinds of wonderful things that would allow us to establish that there was actual contact with that particular chemical with these mothers in the first trimester, and therefore these children appeared. And probably I still see one of those mothers, and that child lived and is now a teacher for special ed, even though I think she's got some challenges, and I think she either uses a walker or a wheelchair. But those are the things that really stick out in my mind. I think for most of us, or at least for me, if you've done something that you feel like you've helped someone out somewhere, somehow, that really makes your heart sing.
Absolutely. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you maintain connections with a lot of people from your past cases?
Well, I don't actively do it, but they do. They're sweethearts. I have found out, that there's just some people that are beyond the pale as far as being great hearts, and we have a lot of them down here in the valley. And so they one of the things I think among the Mexican American traditions is gratitude. That attitude of gratitude. And I don't know where it comes from or how it comes from, but there's a whole lot of sentimental, views about, someone who's gone through some difficult times. And I think probably some of us who, we haven't had particular difficult times, but have been through some challenging times. And we're really grateful to be where we are.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So let's talk a little about your family.
Okay.
Like your wife, your
Okay.
kids.
Well, that's a long story. No, but I mean, what happens is I got married the first time, and 4 children, and the relationship, eventually did not work out, and went through a divorce. But again, one of those great things about mothers, going like, your relationship may not have worked out with, a person, but don't forget you've got 4 kids, and you don't abandon them or leave them. So we got to the point where we were very, amiable as far as parenting, and I spent a lot of time with my children, and forever, eternally grateful for that piece of advice. Then I actually, where we're sitting here, I stayed single for a while, probably 5-10 years, something like that. And then I was going out with a teacher that was teaching here at St. Joseph's. She was teaching English and Spanish. And unfortunately, she had a brain tumor, and I got remarried in the hospital in Harlingen. And she was supposed to live for a year. and eventually passed away after 5 years. So it was another one of those situations in your life that you deal with, but it was, what it does tell you about life is when you know that there's an expiration date coming up, you don't really spend a whole lot of time with trivial, sillinesses that one does in life. You don't get mad about very, very many things because you know that your time is short. And then again, after she passed away in 91, then I stayed single again for another 10 years and presently remarried.
Oh.
So anyway, and I've got 4 children. Unfortunately, my oldest one, who became a priest, a Jesuit priest, passed away from cancer as well. My second wife had a brain tumor, and that's how she passed away. And cancer has kind of taken its toll on the family. And then the other 3, one lives in here. They all became lawyers. All the boys became lawyers, and my daughter became a medical doctor. So yeah, and she became a psychiatrist and living in San Antonio. But I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and I never got to be a psychiatrist, but she did. So anyway, education came in again as well for that generation. They all have either their law degree or their medical degree. So I think a lot of that again comes back to how you are formed in your childhood and what's important to you. And education for me and children are probably 2 of the main things that I focus on most every day.
Absolutely. So you would think it fair to say that you had an influence on your kids becoming lawyers?
I think so, a little bit. Yeah. I mean, like I said, for whatever reason, I think there was something fun about being a lawyer, and again, I guess had to do something with being a trial lawyer. You're not like a TV lawyer, but you know what? I've always, I guess they grew up with me. I mean, anyway, and we spent a lot of time together. I feel like when you're putting on a lawsuit, a lot of it is like putting on a play, and you choreograph everything, but you've got to really be reading the jury, you got to be reading the judge, you got to be reading your client, you got to be, really, I think a good trial lawyer is generally very much aware of all his surroundings. I think a trial lawyer that does a good job cares mostly about, or if not the ultimate, is making sure that the client is well represented. And then I think the other thing is you pay attention to detail and you get better prepared and you never forget, what your goal is in that lawsuit. And so you focus and you put all the energy you can, and then once you get through with it, then you go relax a little bit.
Right, absolutely.
But that's part of it. That's kind of, and I think that the boys actually saw me do that, and so they thought, this looks like fun, and we were blessed enough to make a little bit of money, as well. So, but out of all of them, there's only one that does trial work. My oldest son, as soon as he finished law school, he joined the Jesuits. And then my youngest one went to law school, but he's in private equity. He likes the making money part of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. It seems like they do a lot of similar work to you.
Yeah, no, it was, I can truly say, we've had the things that happen in life, but it's been a great journey. I mean, and God has been really good.
So how did that translate into politics?
Well, as we sit here today, you've noticed we have a beautiful campus here. I was sat as a board member at this school, and here at this school, you can now be a board member if you have a child here. So after your children are gone, then you get a chance to serve. And so I sat on this board, and we did a lot of great things fixing it up for 10 years. Then I went to what we call the Guadalupe Middle School, which is a middle school tuition-free Catholic education that we have to raise a lot of money for. But I did that for 10 years, and then there seemed to be a need to try to do a little bit better for the city. There was just a whole lot of issues that I said, if we don't try to move it forward, and again, it's education and kids. To me, that's the key. And I thought, if we really want to make it a place for people like yourself and that are from, if you're from this area, most of the young kids going like, well, I'm not coming back, and I wanted to make it a place for young people to come back and give them the opportunities. And I think that's really what motivated me to get into civic, service. So that's what I did.
Oh, wow, great.
Yeah, and again, I just, like with everything else, if you're going to do something, do it right, okay, and do it for the right reason. And so it was something that a lifelong dream. It wasn't something on my bucket list, but I did it. We ran a good campaign. We won. We took a look at what was the job opportunities out there. Again, going back to work and study. What were the educational components? Since we've been in that position, SpaceX is coming to this area. They're going to have the first commercial launch pad. I got a chance to meet Elon Musk out there in Hawthorne. The University of Texas now has the UTRGV, the merger, which means we have the permanent university funds. That was really important for me. We kept the campus downtown. Otherwise, the downtown, you got to understand, Brownsville is a very historical town. It was founded in 1848, but it's been here a lot longer than that, and it's got a great history. And so what happens is you've got a lot of great buildings downtown, which we're trying to restore. And so all those things, to me, again, you want to, for young people like yourself, you want to come into an environment that's conducive to learning, to job opportunities, and can also be pretty. And, who doesn't like to go somewhere where it's pretty? It's just life.
That's true. What role did you play in the merger? How did that start?
Well, it started because the community college here and the university got at odds. And some good reasons, some not so good reasons. For whatever reason, it turned out that they weren't able to continue together because actually the Texas Southmost College and the University of Texas at Brownsville formed a partnership back in 1991, and it was really unique because it was the only one around. But it also excluded them from getting any permanent university funds because they weren't just only UT. When they went through this period of time where they decided they really weren't, shouldn't be together anymore, Francisco Figueroa, who was a chancellor at that point, along with some of the regents, they decided, well, let's go see what we're going to do. And according to what I know, a young lawyer with the university system says, well, you know what, if we have a brand new university and we can merge Edinburgh and Pan American with UTB, then now we will be eligible for those permanent university funds. And so that to me is, funding is an extremely important part. And quite frankly, I think that, some of the opportunities that were given to us down here by the university system, there was some maybe, I went to UT up in Austin, but that was the only place you could go. And then, as far as a four-year college. And so a lot of times you wonder about, how all that works, and I think it's good for young people to go to other parts of Texas, other parts of the world, other parts of the United States. But by the same token, there's a lot of cost involved in living outside of the homes. So at this particular point, I'm going like, eventually, I think we're going to get a lot of students from a lot of different areas. But for right now, at least give the opportunity for the young people to, if they can't go somewhere else, at least they've got the opportunity to do it here. So I was very involved with it because I was trying very hard to have a four-year university to remain in not only in Brownsville but in the Valley. And so I became very much involved with trying to figure out how that all worked. And of course, then along there came the medical school, which was a great dimension. I'm very grateful again to Dr. Figueroa, who was a chancellor at that time, and the Board of Regents, because they really, I thought, did an extraordinary job for us in the Valley in planting a good flag down here for the university system.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I was deciding to go to UT, they hadn't merged yet. So
That's right.
What was the deciding factor in naming it UTRGV?
I think they voted on it, the students. I'm not quite sure. Like I said, that was the part that interested me the most was the concept and the getting of the funding, because what happens, even though you have Pell Grants that were helping some of our students, we didn't have when you have the permanent university funds, you have the ability to do the buildings, you extend your opportunities with the different kinds of curriculum that you can have. So as far as the naming and all the other logistical details, I really didn't get myself involved in it because I knew that those things were a lot more out of my realm. As far as that was something I thought you young people should do.
Right. So just recently in December, I believe, accreditation was put on probation.
Yeah, like I said, I think they're all, in the law you have substantive issues and then you have procedural issues. And some of them, I don't think this is a substantive issue. I think it's a procedural issue that can be resolved. The university system, quite frankly, not because I went to it, but it's as good as it is anywhere in the world, and I think, Texas is fortunate that we have, that foundation of the university funds, because what happens is no matter how you'd like to frame it, without money, it makes it difficult. So you have, no matter how good your heart is and how well intended you are, it still takes money to buy the groceries, no matter which way you look at it.
Right. And so with the expandment of the university system with the medical school, are there any other things happening that you would like to put into place?
Well, I think what happens is I'd like to see it really expand. The medical school is a good part of it. I think it needs to be a little bit more regionally organized, and they'll get there. It's just going to be a part of time. But like what you have in the Brownsville area is you have the beach within 30 minutes. I think that hopefully the situation in Mexico will improve with time, and I think that it will. There's a lot of amenities down here. There's a lot of amenities up in the Upper Valley. But quite frankly, I think this whole area is going to be more integrated, and like we have the marine biology section over here, which is rightfully so. You need a lot more engineering because we're going to have SpaceX right here in our backyard. An architectural school would be wonderful, because we do have all these buildings. So I think, I call it sometimes a self-correcting process, that your geography sometimes dictates what it is that you eventually end up with. And so, again, Brownsville is very well situated. You've got the water, you're right here at the border, and you've got beautiful resacas out there that are just gorgeous. You have birding, now that we're really into tourism, we're doing a lot of hike and bike trails around here. And I think what that's doing, to be honest with you, is a lot of the young people, I can't tell you how many times people say, why can't this be more like Austin? Because everybody's out there doing things and it sounds like it's cool and it's fun. And I think Brownsville is getting more and more, not like Austin, it's staying just like Brownsville, but with a lot of the amenities and a lot of the things that allow people to be outdoors and enjoy and be healthy and have fun, which is important.
True, absolutely. So can you tell me a little bit more about SpaceX? Can you explain that?
SpaceX is to me one of those fun things, because I did get a chance to visit with Elon Musk, and other folks did too from Brownsville. But he really is an interesting soul. He's got that, you know, that twinkle in his eye that tells you that, for him, uh, there's so much more to this life than what we probably think about. I mean, he's got a tremendous creative, innovative mind, and he's always looking at something more, something different. I mean, he's got that series on National Geographic about going to Mars. I mean, he's going to try to get someone around the moon or whatever it is. He's just an interesting, because I'm such a curious fella, and because I'm also a little bit hyper. I like, as we say, I like the way he thinks, and I mean, I've been reading about his, car company, and the Chinese just put in a bunch of money, the investors, and obviously the Chinese like him too. So. SpaceX will be an interesting dynamic for Brownsville, for the simple reason that you're bringing the space industry and all the things that will surround space industry, and being that space really is the latest frontier. And if Mr. Musk is correct, I mean, we'll be able to put a colony on Mars. I mean, there's going to be, I don't think we've gotten to our limits as far as being on this Earth, but I think that the future is out in space. I mean, it's like the Wild Wild West was way back when. This is the wild space, and it's going to be interesting. I think the human spirit and the human mind have a lot more to experience than we have at this particular point.
Absolutely. I feel like that exploration is very important.
Well, like I said, our capacity, we are limited by our life experiences and by a certain lifetime space that you have, and so, that's why I think you need to make the most of what you're given, and it makes no difference how long you're here. I mean, like I said, I always ask people, I don't have all the answers, but, none of us know where we're going to be born, to who we're going to be born, where we're going to be born, and we don't come with an expiration date. So we don't know when we have to leave. So that tells me I'm not in charge. Someone else is in control. Or maybe it's just happenstance. I don't know, it depends on which way you look at it. But while you're here, I think have fun. And get after it.
Absolutely. So since we're talking about some of the things that have happened while you're mayor, can you tell me a little bit about your first campaign? What was that like?
It was interesting. No, like I said, I had never run for anything. Okay, I mean, I like politics from a distance, and I had seen the previous president. I had gotten involved with him in his campaign, just because, first of all, I got a chance to meet him and get to know him a little bit. And quite frankly, and regardless of your views, the fella is really bright. He really is thoughtful. He's very well read. He took his job very seriously, and he still probably has a lot more to go. And I enjoyed him a lot, and so therefore I got involved with his campaign back in 2007. And so that kind of whetted my appetite a little bit to the process about how we went about it. He had some terrific advisors and campaign people that I always get a little overwhelmed or very, very impressed by someone who runs a good shop. Someone who dedicates themselves to whatever their mission is and their vision, and actually does it well, sticks to it, and gets it done. And he did a really nice job of campaigning. So, but it's a little different when you're watching it from the outside, and then you're actually the person that's running. And I think probably it was fun in the sense that you got a chance to meet a lot of people, see a lot of people, get to know a lot of people that you probably wouldn't know otherwise. The bad side of it is as we all know, the social media and the bloggers and things like that are really beyond the pale, because there are a lot of untruths come out, and which, I guess it's the nature of the beast. But it makes it a little unsavory. But again, you take the good with the bad and you overcome. So I've done it. I've run twice now, so it's been, like I said, it's not my favorite thing about being mayor, but it's a necessity. So that's the way it goes.
Was your family like majorly involved?
Not really. Like I said, in our family structure, everybody pretty much is very independent. Everybody's got their own ideas and thoughts about what they need to do, and it's not that we disagree. It's not that they're not there for you. But I mean, they're involved in either their own families or their own careers. I mean, and they were there, but it's not like they didn't drop everything and go do this. But I mean, rightfully so. I mean, I very much feel like you need to do your thing. You're here interviewing. You're doing a journalist thing. I have no idea about your family, but you've got to let people lead their lives and enjoy what they're doing, because I've always said you got to do what you love and love what you do. So
Absolutely. So I'm sure this made you more connected to the city of Brownsville, correct?
it did, and I will tell you, this is a beautiful town. I mean, the people that are in here are just terrific. I mean, they're whoever created us. I mean, I'm Catholic, obviously, and I believe what I believe, but the Creator has done a wonderful job of giving us these beautiful hearts, and a lot of them live in Brownsville. I find people really they reach out, they do some things, and again, going back to the Voices of Brownsville, I mean, the majority of our people are Mexican American. And a lot of us have relatives in Mexico, and a lot of, we're bicultural, we're bilingual. It adds a great dimension to us. And so that's the one part that's really neat, and there's a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of good things. And that's good to know. I mean, like I said, it's easy to get into life and say, okay, I've got my life to lead, and but I think there's a room and a place for everything. And I've been again blessed by doing this at a time when my kids are all grown up. I have a little bit of time. I've now gotten into the food business. I went back to my roots. The wholesale grocery business. Have a couple of restaurants, and I enjoy it. I mean, I like to see people enjoy life. That's what I do. And so, again, not that there's not challenges, and not that there's things that don't come across your way that do cause you a lot of concern, but for the most part, it's a very rewarding thing that we do.
Right. So your restaurants, they got started because of what happened in your childhood?
Yeah, no, I know the food business quite well, okay? And what I can tell you is that a lot of people, they love to sit there and say, you know what, I want to go in the restaurant business. That sounds like fun. It's a lot of work. But it all started out with, there was a bakery in Harlingen that we used to deliver to called Vanny Tilden. And they closed up, and there was a lady named Lola who had worked there for 40 years. And so she called me up one day and she said, they're closing up. What am I going to do? I've never done anything else. I said, well, let's start a bakery. And she says, I got all the recipes. I said, that's great. I said, so where we're going to do it? I said, here in Brownsville, because she's from Harlingen, or from Combs. And so we did, this is about 7 or 8 years ago, and that's how we got started. Unfortunately, she had leukemia, and she passed away after about 3 years. But we have Lola's Bakery. It was now Lola's Bistro. But that's how we got started. And the thing about it is, in the restaurant business or the bakery business, the food business, you got to be careful and watch your nickels and dimes. It's not a big, profit margin. And so a lot of people that get into it, they don't make it very long. So she brought the expertise as far as the baking, and I did the capital. I mean, that's what I invested in. And so then we started a barbecue place also here. But they were, like I said, again, they're ideas of trying to help people, and they might sound true altruistic, but it really, it just happens that way. A lot of times it's sort of like my law practice. You're trying to help someone, it really works out well. And at the same time, we were able to make a little bit of money, as we were doing it. So, and this one's is going well, so.
Right. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun, and it's hard to explain, but I think that if your heart's in the right place, God takes care of the rest.
Right.
So far.
Absolutely. So you foster connections not only through politics, but through like restaurants and meeting
Yeah,
people.
I mean, it's a good place to meet people. I mean, and again, it's been an evolution, because it wasn't always easy. And like I said, Van Tilden was a place where I grew up with that sort of bakery, and they're not like pan dulce like we were eating this morning. It's the lady actually. Van Tilden was actually a lady who married a fella here in the valley back in the 30s, and she was actually from Atlanta, and so what she was doing was Southern baking. Okay, so it's a little different than the pan dulce that we eat every day, and so I used to love it, and I mean I grew up with it. I mean, again, because I used to go deliver, and then they'd give me some bread, and I liked what they did, and so that's how Lola's came about. And then the other one was the barbecue place. I mean, it's because I love Franklin's, in Austin. And so I try to get him to come down. He says, I don't know. He just wants to stay there, okay? And he doesn't like to open up other places. So I got the fellow who did his pit to do my pit. And then I'm serving the same kind of meat he is. If you've already got if you got a successful thing going, why reinvent the wheel? So, and we got it right out there, and a pit master who, again, had tried his hand at doing this, but the money didn't make it, so he went back into the butcher, not became a butcher, but went back to the meat department at one of our local stores. So I talked him into coming back, and he's doing great.
And the name of this restaurant is?
1848.
Awesome.
1848, and they say, well, why 1848? Because that's when Brownsville was founded, in 1848.
Wow, that's
Also, the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty was signed in 1848. So I'm trying to teach the kids a little bit of history while I'm doing some of the things that I'm doing.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Has there been anybody that you've met so far doing all of this that has like really stuck with you, inspired you?
There's probably a lot of folks that I would say, and I'm looking at whoever's classroom this is, but this looks like it's Jeff Cowan's classroom, and his wife is a city commission, Dr. Rose Gowan. She also went to St. Joe, but she's been very, very, I mean, her theme is health, because we have a lot of diabetes and we have a lot of obesity. So, but she's done a great job with the hike and bike trails and grants and things like that. But there's a lot of folks, but this just comes to mind because I see that, the diplomas up there with that name on it. But no, like I said, frankly, like I think I've already fully explained, is that, the mom and the pop, my mom and pop, they were really, the core values, I think, again, working and being honest, integrity, is just so essential to me. And I can't think of anybody else who had a greater influence. From the educational point of view, the Sisters of Divine Providence, probably a few clergy people that we're inspiring in the sense of, I think that's where I think I said do it right and do it for the right reason. That came about somewhere in there.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. So, let's see. As mayor of Brownsville, have there been any initiatives that you've put into place that you feel like might help with the health disparities here? Discrepancies?
Well, I've been very supportive of all the efforts with regards to the hike and bike trails. I personally am, I used to run 6 miles a day, okay, until the knees gave way to the aging process. But I still, like I said, I get on my treadmill every day for a couple of miles. To me, it's essential to do exercise, okay? And so I also get on my bicycle, even at this late date. But, we've tried the cyclobia. I don't know if you know what cyclobia is. Cyclobia, we closed down all the city and let everybody ride through the streets of town. We went down to Colombia. They did it in Bogota way back when. And it's to empower people to be able to move and don't worry about cars running over you. The little kids get on their bicycles. And we closed down a certain area of town, and we're going to have another one, I think, here in April. And I'm just a big believer that if a good, healthy lifestyle, and not that I live it like that all the time, but I do, I offset it. Any of my bad habits I offset by doing some exercise. And also watch what you eat. I love to eat, but I don't eat that much because, I always say even just a taste is good enough. That's all you need to do. You don't have to be measured per se all the time, but most of the time, because that, it can drag you down from an energy standpoint. If at least in my life, if I eat too much, then I'm kind of get sleepy and all that good stuff. And, a lot of times I have so many things going on in my mind that I don't want to miss out on something. So I have to keep my energy level, at a high speed.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. So your second time running, you had 5 people running against you?
The first time, yeah. And then again, I had a bunch of them. And the first time I won without a runoff, and I think it's probably beginner's luck. And then the second time I had a runoff, and thank God we were able to win again. But yeah, I keep saying I have a tendency to attract people. I'm just kidding. They tell me the only way to run, there's only 2 ways to run, and that's either scared or unopposed. And I like unopposed, but I doubt seriously that it will ever happen.
Absolutely. So do you think you'll run again? Is that possible?
Yeah, again, right now, health-wise, I feel good. If everything holds out, I probably would and probably will. Not so much because, again, it's a tough job. I will say that, because what happens is, not because it's people, you can't satisfy everybody. That's not my biggest criteria. The thing about it is there are some things that I wanted to start out with that perhaps may not be finished. I've got 2 more years left. It may take a little longer. And so, again, back to my childhood, you want to do something, do it right, get it done, finish it out. Don't leave things halfway done. So if that, and if that's what the people of Brownsville want, God willing, I would do it again, just to finish out what I started, because that's important to me. In other words, Brownsville, I see a lot of changes, and hopefully we've been instrumental in helping that along. But I think, one thing you find out real quick, you can't do it by yourself. It's got to take a team. And I think what happens is we've been blessed with a great team, great people. Again, I go back to the same theory that I've had most of my life when I have people working for me or working with me, is you try to put people in places where they will succeed. And so you have to figure out, we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, so play to your strengths. And what we've been able to do, I think, is bring out the best in a lot of folks. and they've really performed well, whether it be at the Public Utilities Board, the Economic Development, or the city. I think they're, we have, always room for improvement, but they're doing well.
Right. Before we continue, I just want to make sure you're good. Do you need to stop for water, break?
I'm good.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so your campaigns, either one, was there a moment where you thought maybe you wouldn't get elected?
I don't think so. I mean, I'll be fair with you. And the reason being, again, and hopefully it doesn't sound too egotistical, but, I like to be able to plan and organize. And so whenever I go and venture into something, I try to really do get organized and get the list of folks that that we know that are supporting us. We're almost to the point of, I'm sure if some people get upset with us, but we make sure we have ways of finding out not how they voted, but whether they voted. We got early voting, and I learned all this through the other campaigns that I've been involved with. And I mean, there is an organized way to figure out exactly what your turnout's going to be, where the turnout's going to be, and you analyze, okay? And I felt comfortable both times analytically from where we stood. Now you never know, but I don't remember. I just don't remember thinking it's not going to happen. I just think more of it was like, are we performing the way we should? And sometimes, people say you got to come over here, you got to go over there, and sometimes you go like, I'm too tired to go, and sometimes you push yourself, sometimes you don't. But, for the most part, it's thus far we were pretty comfortable,
Right. Okay. So is there any story from either campaign that was pretty defining for you, pivotal?
Again, defining in the sense of the affirmation part. In other words, people say, they're gonna. When we first started, of course, we had no experience, and so we did the best that we could. One of the things that I think I've tried to make sure that in this leadership role that we try not to get people crosswise with each other. And so one of the things that people tell me a lot is we watch the city meeting. You're not as exciting as other previous administrations, but we run it very professional. And I found early on that all your big good companies that want to come into an area, they do watch all that. And they're not going to go spend money or invest in an area that is constantly fighting or constantly not being professional. That's not good for your economy. So I think that would be the thing, that probably that affirmation that knows. And we've had success. We've got an Italian company that's in town. We're seeing a lot of economic growth. What you don't find here is that your workforce is not as trained as it needs to be, so we need to work on that.
Okay. And how do you think you'll go about that?
Well, working through the university, working with the community college. There's several ways to resolve that issue. Again, there you go back to the team effort. You've got to get people on the same page. And, that's the one thing that you find out early, I think like what this administration is finding up there in Washington right now is that, you can't really bully your way through. You really can't force people to do what they don't want to do. You got to figure out where the middle ground is and how do you motivate them, and how do you get your agenda to move forward. You got to make it their agenda. And again, it's no different than picking a jury. If you're a good trial lawyer, what you're saying is you got to get 12 people who you don't even know to agree with what you're saying. And then in my experience, of course, we were always, At the beginning, I did cases that were smaller, but towards the end of the things that I was doing, I mean, these were all, big money cases. So not only do you want them to go along with your side of the story, you also are asking for a whole lot of money. And a lot of folks don't make a whole lot of money, so they're going like, when you're asking for $1 million or more, they're going like, I've never seen $1 million. So now you really got a task in front of you. And I think it's the trial lawyer part of my experience has really helped me out in trying to do the job that I can, because it also, when companies come to town, they're going like, well, I want this and I want that. And I'm going like, well, we can do this, but we can't do that. And, they're going like, I had one of them say, well, what are you, a lawyer? And I said, yes. And so that was kind of fun. And again, if you're running with some of those companies and they want to say something like, well, we'll have to get in litigation, I'm going like, fine. You're not scaring me. A litigation, is better if you can settle things, but if you can't, that's how we settle things. And so, and having all that experience behind me, I've been there, done that.
Right. And it seems that education is the basis for all of this.
Education is, it's indispensable. Like I said, you've got to have that energy, but if you don't have the education and you don't have the experience, you're just not there. In other words, and not that I have it all, but I mean, as far as the things that I'm able to tackle, I'm able to draw in from a lot of the other experiences that I've had, whether educational or life-wise, that help me to try to do the best that I can. And again, nobody's perfect. You got to do the best that you can. You're not God. This isn't heaven. And you just have to deal with what you got and do it the best you can, so you can sleep well at night. And I sleep very well.
Absolutely, that's great. So the Rio Grande Valley had the South Texas Border Initiative. Did you play a role in that at all? And if you didn't, did it affect your life?
Not really. In other words, sometimes I look at things and a name is just a name. It's just a name, right? And so, I can't really say that I actually, got some sort of effect or cause and effect from that initiative. I just know that you just live. I mean, actually every day is a border initiative, and because you don't really think about it that much. You really don't. And like I said, quite frankly, since I've been in this position, you've got wonderful leadership in the Upper Valley, in Edinburgh, in McAllen, and Farr, Westlaco, Mercedes. You got a wonderful, leadership in Harlingen and South Padre Island. So, I like what I see, and I probably wasn't that attuned to everything that was going on. But now I feel one of the things, again, going back to education, is I've been very well educated over the last 6 years about a lot of things, and I like it.
Right. So, I mean, the Rio Grande Valley doesn't have a law school currently. So would you like to see that?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, I don't know that I'm the best judge of that, and I'll tell you why. When I got out of law school back in 1970, we weren't allowed to advertise, and a whole lot of things they're done so much differently. Not to say that it's bad or that it's good, but the only thing that my only comment is that, we've become so divided on so many outlooks. The thing about it is, I think young lawyers need to spend a week or so being a judge. They have to spend a week or so or a month being the prosecutor of someone that's bringing them. You have to have them do the defense side. In other words, learn a little bit about what everybody's role is and be respectful and mindful of what they're doing so that you get a good perspective. I've never been a judge, but I always knew that I would make a horrible judge, And yet here I am as a mayor. A lot of times I end up being the arbitrator, the mediator, or being the guy that settles things. So in a way, you get a little bit of that judicious temperament to you, but that's not the way I lived most of my life. Because when you're a trial lawyer, you're an advocate. Now I've become a real big advocate for Brownsville because that's who I represent. But I also know that I need to keep the team together, and so that you have to reach inside of yourself and say, hey, how do we make this go for the betterment of the community? So, a law school would be good. I just wish that they would. There's a lot of lawyers out there, and I see a lot of young lawyers who are having a difficult time in the law practice, but I don't see them willing to spend a whole lot of time doing training and learning and doing the things that was required of us when we got into the law practice. But then again, times are changing and things are different. It would be nice because, if people wanted to be a lawyer, then they wouldn't have to go to Austin or to San Antonio or to Houston. But there's quite a few law schools already in Texas.
True, you're right.
Are
there any organizations that you are part of because you are Mexican American, correct?
Part of organizations because I'm Mexican American.
Whether it be law, as mayor?
I can't identify. I know that there's caucuses, and then there's quite frankly, I don't know that I'm actively involved in anything that's just totally. The idea of the Mexican American involvement, especially down in South Texas, I think we're the majority. That's why we don't probably think of ourselves as. If you're in Congress, I know that there's the Mexican American caucus up in Congress, and there's only like 7 or 8. They got to feel pretty outnumbered. I can't say because of that. Now, being a Democrat or being a Republican, actually being mayor, you have to be neither one. But I lean towards the causes that are socially progressive. Fiscally, I'm really, I watch my nickels and dimes. But from, I think like healthcare, it's a right. I think that we need to treat this immigration issue as something that I think needs to be addressed in a big, big way. Deportation process needs to be addressed in a big, big way. The lack of respect or dignity towards any human being, to me, there's just no room for it in my journey. Okay, so if you put it in the Mexican American context, I guess just as a matter of being a human being, that would be one. But as far as any active organizations that I just say I belong to this organization or that organization, I think probably speaks to the fact that I never really felt isolated. Again, hopefully not because of my ego, but because of, going like, what makes me any different than anybody else? If I work hard and I, play by the rules, I think I can do as much as. I'm not probably a scientist by nature, but within the confines of my abilities, I can do just as good as anybody.
Absolutely. This year's political climate is very different from others. How have you seen that affect your work?
Well, again, I very much am against all these people that want to be racially, exclusive. I think we all belong to the human family. We all should love each other. Now, it doesn't mean we have to like each other. But I don't see anybody, again, back to my earlier statement, going like, how do you know who you were going to be born to? How did you know where you're going to be born? We could have been born in Ethiopia. Those things are not, I think Warren Buffett calls it the ovarian lottery. It's we don't know. So what makes any one person feel like they're better than someone else? See, that's the part that I don't like. I don't like there's a superior race. There is no superior race. The whole superior race is the human race, and if it's the evolution theory, maybe we're just monkeying around or something. It's it's your way of looking at life, but I don't think that anybody has got the right to demean anybody else or say, just because you're younger than I am, that you're not as good as I am, or just because you've got brown skin or white skin or black skin or yellow skin. And give me the punchline.
Absolutely. There are physical manifestations of that, though. Like, have you heard anything about the border wall here in Brownsville?
Of course, I've been dealing with it for, since it started. I mean, I helped the university when trying to work out the deal for the border wall that extends on their campus. It's a totally ludicrous idea. I mean, I've been out with the Border Patrol. I see it all the time. What you really need to do is you need to have the ability to detect people, and then you have the ability to detain them, okay, if they're not doing something legal. You also should be reaching out to Mexico and South and Central America. I mean, I've seen, it breaks my heart to go to the detention centers to see these unaccompanied minors, 6 and 7-year-old kiddos, and you go like, most of our 6 and 7-year-olds are thinking about, they're in first grade or pre-kinder or whatever. What goes on in their minds? What kind of life experience are they going to have as they go through this? And for their parents to let them go, But like I said, I worked a lot with the immigration issues, and for most of them, like I say, they don't want to immigrate; they have to. It's either life or death. And I don't know what makes these politicians so oblivious to them. Rand Paul was down here and went to the detention center with a bishop and Sister Norma. And if your heart doesn't break, then you don't have one. Because what happens is we've got to do better than this, than what we're doing right now. And so a border wall is not going to be the answer. The answer is a conversation, talking to both countries, talking to people about not coming across, going through the regular channels, the part about trying to, the drug situation is different than human smuggling. The drug situation is if you didn't have a demand, you wouldn't have the traffic. And so far right now, the United States is a big consumer of drugs. It's sad because I've seen people that are on drugs and how it ruins their lives. You say, but for the grace of God, there go I, and try not to be in that situation.
Right. And as mayor, what roles can you play in combating drugs and this issue with immigration?
What we've done here is, we reach out to the kids. A lot of education, back to education. The police force. We've had several times. We've had a lot of meetings, but sometimes we get someone who has actually gone to prison, come back, and they're released and they've reformed their lives. We go and talk to some of the kids. My biggest thing, I think, is if you get to know your people, there's going to be gangs, there's going to be all kinds of little things. There's an underbelly to everything, society. And so if you can reach out to these kids, education, conversation, say don't do that, and if you're going to do that, let me know. How can I give you an alternative? It breaks my heart to see anybody ruin their life. Life is precious, and every life counts. They go to Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter. Every life counts. Everybody should be awarded, and deservedly so, that respect and the dignity of a human life. And when you start disrespecting human life and it means nothing, then you've got problems.
Absolutely. And did you have these conversations yourself as a child?
I tell people all the time, we didn't have time even to go through puberty. No. We actually literally worked most of the time or studied. There wasn't, thank God there wasn't an option. It was just like, and even to this day, people say you and I were talking about not having weekends. We probably didn't have any weekends back then either. And no, we just you were either working, studying, or maybe even playing or going to the beach. But that was what everybody gets together in a pickup and take off to the beach. But we didn't really have a whole lot of time to think about, hey, I'm gonna, go do this or go do that. And the other thing is you didn't have much money. Okay, I mean that's I don't understand how some of these guys get money, and you weren't, nobody ever said there was a shortcut to getting money. It was you want money, you go to work, period.
Mm-hmm. So the friends that you surrounded yourself with, I'm assuming, thought the same, or did they not?
What's that?
The friends you surrounded yourself with, were they similar to you in that respect?
I don't know whether they were or they weren't, because what happens was we didn't get much time to spend with friends. Mm-hmm. I mean, people would say, let's go to the beach, and my dad would say, well, we haven't finished, working. Or let's go do this. Well, I was with my dad a lot. I mean, we would go up and down Old Military Highway, taking orders and delivering stuff. I mean, they didn't give you much time for, and again, I don't think I thought too much about it because it was like, I can't go do this or I can't go do that because my dad or my mom needs this. And so you just did it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So keeping you busy kept you out of trouble?
I think so. And like I said, in my life, my curiosity also just, whenever there is free time, is generally I'm on the internet looking up, different things that, where do you get the best, peaches to make a peach cobbler? All kinds of, at this time of the year, we're getting close to April, May, since my dad was in the wholesale grocery, I know when the season for all the fruits are, and I love fruits. So mango season is just around the corner. Then the summertime comes, you go to the hill country to get your peaches. It's watermelon time. I just don't know that we ever thought too much about anything else other than what we had to do. And again, like I've told you before, I love to eat, and so it was like. Right now I've got some chicken. I'm brining some chicken. It's always something about what we're going to do or how we're going to do it, and or I've got, I have to go do some continuing legal education. I've got a full schedule coming up next week. You really don't have time for, a whole lot of other things other than getting things done that you like.
Right. And so you're still very busy now with what, if you don't mind me asking?
What am I busy with now? Okay. I'll be fair with you in the sense of, I have 2 restaurants here. I have a law practice. I have a restaurant in Austin. I, have the mayor's job. We work a lot with, right now we're trying to build a new airport. As mayor, you are also an ex officio member of the Utilities Board. You're also on the Economic Development Board. I'm chairman of the Lower Rio Grande Valley. I could keep on going. Because you're also the chairman of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which means that you got to figure out where your streets are going for your entire city. There's issues about bike and hike trails that we, this week we met with Union Pacific, because they, moved their rail over to a different place. It's a pretty much a constant, and like I said, but I enjoy it. Like I said, if I didn't like to work, I probably wouldn't, and so having my journey to look back at and knowing what I know about the different illnesses, cancers, and when you realize that you have a certain amount of time to do some things in this life, and then you start going like there is no guarantees, there is a tomorrow. So let's see what we can do today.
Absolutely. Okay. I think that's all I personally have for you, but is there anything you'd like to mention?
I think she'd like to mention something.
Yes. You mentioned that gratitude is an important Mexican-American tradition because of difficult experiences that they've lived. Like, what difficult moments do you remember growing up?
Well, I think what happens is in a very big way is you understand that you might be different than someone else. Okay, and you experience it when you're a young adult or a young person, that you go like, well, I'm not as old as somebody else. I don't go to a job or this, but when you,
So you said that it was part of your life growing up.
yeah, it is. And like I said, I mean, again, unless you're oblivious, but for the most part, in other words, you have to recognize who you are. You really do. And so, I mean, when you sit down and reflect a little bit, what am I? And I mean, like I said, the translation may lose something in the sense of other people might take a look at you and go like, well, they may characterize something different. But I think in your heart and in your soul, if you feel very strongly about something, which I do, and that is, you have something, to offer, and your heart really wants to go out there and reach someone to do something for their betterment, in the sense of, I want you to enjoy what you're doing, then go for it. I mean, like I said, they may like it, they may not. Hopefully they will, because if taken in the right vein, it should be something positive. And that's, like I said, I like to walk on the sunny side of life.
Right.
Let's hope we do.
Absolutely. So you agree that education not only begins like at school and at home, but like everywhere.
Well, education is everywhere. Okay, but education, I think, in the Mexican American culture, for some reason, at least maybe it's my own interpretation. I don't know, but I think it's a very important part of of our culture. We like to, whether it's your ability with your hands or whether it's with your brain. For some reason, I see, when people like to characterize the Mexican American culture as something that's, with a sombrero sitting under the tree, sleeping the whole time, it's the wrong image. I see, whether it's entrepreneurship, you see these people selling fruits on the side of the road. I mean, se andan moviendo. I mean, everybody's moving. I mean, we like it. That's just who we are, I think,
Absolutely. So what role do you think bilingual education should play in that?
I think the more linguistic you can be, the better off you are. I mean, I make my attempts at French, but they're very, very bad. But for all the Romantic languages, I think there's a common thread. The Germanic and those guttural ones are a little tougher for me, but. I love when you can walk in. I mean, people sit there and say, you're going to speak Spanglish. No, I love it when you can go from one language to the other and flow. It's like a dance. If you got rhythm, go for it. And you shouldn't be embarrassed, and nobody should be sitting there. I mean, it's people say, well, you're talking about me. No, I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking with you. It just sometimes it flows. And again, I think when something flows, and like I said, when your heart's in it, and your heart sings, people hear the music. That's all.
Absolutely. So what role did Spanish play in your home as a child?
Well, that's a funny question, because it's my dad would always say, somebody would call on the line and he didn't want to talk to him, and he'd say, aquí, mijo, tú que sabes inglés, I think it's happened to all of us. I love all those things that happens, with your mom and your dad. When they didn't want to do something, here, son, you know English, I don't. So no, but we spoke Spanish all the time at home. That was just a given. and you go out to the school and you do English, and I think back in those days they would get after you for speaking Spanish when you're in school, but we did it anyway. That's when we talked about people behind their backs. No, I think the more languages you know, the better off you are. But I mean, like in this town, one of the things when you see people coming in here looking for economic opportunities especially from South America, Mexico, or Central America, and they're going like, man, it's great because everybody understands my language here, and that's true. I mean, all of us speak Spanish here, whether good or bad or indifferent. I mean, some of us speak it better than others, but I mean, I just came back from Mexico City, and a lot of my talks have to be in Spanish, and so that's okay. And I get interviewed by the Mexican station, so you have to speak in Spanish, And sometimes I wish it were better, and sometimes I wish I had more practice because you just don't, utilize it as often. But like my kids, they really don't know Spanish that well. I mean, they a little bit better than sometimes, but I think they regret it, and I'm sorry that I didn't, make them speak more of it. But I mean, I think I took them to Mexico to language schools, but they're not as fluent as they probably ought to be.
Okay, understandable. That happens.
Well, like I said, it's in our world and in my journey, we didn't have much of a choice because if your mom and dad were mad at you, they wouldn't speak English to you.
That's true. My parents still do that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can understand that. See, that's the language that most of us can understand, because our parents, they haven't changed that much, and they're cute as hell.
Absolutely, that's very true. Awesome. So, I think that's it. Is
Good.
there anything you'd like to add that I didn't ask you?
No, I think you guys are doing super. I really do. I'm glad you're pursuing journalism, and I wish you nothing but the best. I think, what I think I probably forgot is, as a trial lawyer, I think the best trial lawyers are the ones that can tell the story. And if you want to know the truth, that's what we're doing in this life, is telling a story. And if we don't tell the story, then nobody's going to hear you. And, and a lot of times it's hard for us to be real open about how we feel or what we say or what we do or what we think. And some things ought to be kept to yourself. But for the most part, if you tell the story in a good way about how it is how sad you are or how glad you are, those are the conversations that I've had with some of these young people, these juvenile, they're not delinquents, they're just juvenile, that could get themselves in a bad way. But if you tell them, hey, I mean, when I was growing up, I grew up in the barrio. I mean, it's not like I don't know where the barrio is. I mean, the guy down the street was the plomero, and then there was the carpintero, and there was this guy and that guy. And I can tell you the underbelly of all the barrio. It's not like we don't know it. It's not that we didn't live it. It's just that we had more fun with it, and some of those guys ended up in prison. Some of the guys didn't, okay? But, you felt sorry for them, for all of them, and the ones that didn't have as much fun as you did, but because everybody had a sobrenombre, it was either muerte or somebody, everybody had a nickname, right? And so it's not that we don't understand our culture, we should embrace it and we should love it and try to better it, because what happens is I don't like to see, there's too many people, too many Mexican Americans in jails and confinements that really shouldn't be there.